So there is a presupposition on my part that one is not merely doing occasionally some NLP, but one has got what I would describe as a consistently applied consciousness practice within which one utilizes some NLP thinking, whether that's DHE thinking or classical NLP thinking. But I think there's a little obsolescence that's kind of in there, that those sorts of things are just sort of, I don't know how often they're engaged on a daily basis, if one is constantly aware of one's personal utilizations of these things. A belief that I would certainly carry is the more that one lives it, thinks it, does it on a day-to-day, minute-to-minute basis, the more powerful it's going to be. Just like if you study consistently, whatever field you're in, you're constantly engaged in it, your mind is very much involved with that kind of stuff on multiple levels, you will be really, really good at that. And if you just kind of go do it once in a while or now and then, and go sort of and have an experience and then go and do some other stuff and occasionally draw on that, you're going to have a very, very different relationship with the practice. So there has, at least in my personal experience, been a fusion of different materials from different sources, different traditions, different bases. As I mentioned, going to Bali and having some quite profound and exceptional and very much not of the Western worldview and universe view with the shamans and the priest class, the caste there in Bali. Although I went there with a very strong motivational pattern to try to replicate or understand more deeply what John Grinder was doing. You know, John Grinder was making some very interesting claims and descriptive sort of depictions of what was happening, say, in Balinese culture. I have to find out for myself. It wasn't satisfactory for me merely to hear John talk about it. I had to actually go embed myself in that world and find out firsthand directly from these people. And yeah, I mean, so what John was presenting, I would say, was a very good faith, storytelling, a recounting, sort of an impression, an impressionistic personal view of what he got out of that culture. But it wasn't the culture. It was his impressionistic view of it. So there's a very big difference between even a finely told story, a very compellingly told story, and actually having the direct experience. So that's the kind of distinction I started to make once I was, say, there in that Indonesian Balinese culture, speaking my very rudimentary Bahasa Bali. So the same thing I think applies to just about everything. One of the things that I believe does occur in more advanced states of consciousness, and this is my impression, although it seems to be that when you meet people who are truly capable of and grounded in non-ordinary consciousness, it does seem that the brain is being used, if that's the only thing, and there may be higher dimensional or sort of processes of self-universe connectivity or something happening on some level of energy or some level of capacity, some kind of paranormal thing that it seems to me to be highly credible, that those exceptional mental states that involve something beyond the physical self do seem to be highly plausible. I'm well enough trained as a scientist that I don't believe in being doctrinaire anything, including scientific. The most scientific person is, I think, cogent enough to realize that the scientific model also has its limits and it can be imprisoning in certain ways. And some of the most, I think, impossible people to be around are scientists who can only see things through a very rigid, systematic, scientific, algorithmic kind of worldview, and not take on. And the best, most interesting scientists are the ones that are capable of addressing and enjoying and taking pleasure in all these other complexities, and saying, well, but this is as far as science can really fully ground us in the discussion. But that doesn't mean you can't have a discussion. It's just not one that's grounded in a very gridded out scientific way. So all that and above. As far as DHE, I think it's interesting. It's an interesting form of storytelling. It's an interesting set of mappings, and it has some usefulness, and I have preferred to utilize its usefulness within these other models and within these other understandings and experiences of sort of reality in its sort of Western normal way and some of its sort of non-Western paranormal ways. And I don't have a real problem with that. You're being very scientific and mythological and shamanic at the same time is perfectly okay. I don't see them as in any way mutually exclusive. So within the DHE model, I think it's handy, and I use this a lot, but I use it in a I think a very streamlined, simplified way, and I'm very, very conscious of assigning it. Now, I don't know if I'm really assigning it to my left hemisphere, or that's just the way that my brain wants to look at itself, and engage in a number of very interesting and amusing fictions that help me utilize this stuff to its best efficacy without really being completely neurologically, anatomically true. But my feeling or my take on this is that it's a very strong left brain assignment, while I'm also choosing or directing my right brain to make some very strong right brain assignments that involve a lot more of what Grinder is talking about in a simultaneous way. So then those integrating parts of the brain, the stuff in the middle, the white tissue tracts and the glial cells that seem to do a lot of that sort of interhemispheric integration, then become elevated and have to take on a lot more responsibility for maintaining kind of a balanced dialogue and a constant conversation, an interesting conversation, really a compelling, fascinating conversation between these two selves and these two potential ways of filtering what is real. So I don't think there's any way that one is negating the other. I think they're very, very complementary, and I think it's very possible to do it, but it does require a building of a foundational kind of consciousness that can contain both of those perspectives at the same time, at the same moment, for their own interests and purposes.